All right, everyone, welcome back to A Rural Music Teacher. I'm your solo host this week, Andre Wilkins. Katie is back in Mississippi visiting family, and I told her that I'd cover for both of us for episode 6. I'd just like to remind everybody our mission statement is this is a podcast where we educate, elevate, and encourage rural music teachers of all levels in the pursuit of a fulfilling career in music education. Our podcast values are to be positive, solution-based, learning from each other's experiences and strengths, a safe space to be vulnerable with our struggles and figure out solutions together. And this is not a place to throw others under the bus, judge, or allow our egos to dominate our conversation. We have a really exciting episode today. This is episode 6. Percussion for the non-percussionist. Our guest today is Dr. Ben Justis from Western Colorado University. Ben, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Andre. Really looking forward to this.
Absolutely. How about you start us off with where you went to college, how you ended up with your journey here in Colorado, and you're based in Gunnison, which, I mean, that doesn't get much more rural than that.
It is pretty rural. We were kind of 2 hours from just about anything. And yeah, you'll need to go at least an hour to get to the nearest Target if you need to stock up on bubbly water or whatever it is that you need. But yeah, I'm really stoked to be here. Thank you, Andre. This is a great podcast and a really wonderful service that you're doing for the music community, especially in our neck of the woods. You're in Salida. I'm an hour-ish west in Gunnison. Beautiful place, but yes, these places certainly come with challenges. So I went to school, back to your original question, Colorado State, a place so nice. I went there twice. I went there for music education undergrad, had a wonderful experience, and then went for a percussion master's after that. Then went to the University of Kansas for music composition. So actually, all three of my music degrees were in different things. I'd always loved composing the entire time, so I'm really glad I had a chance to learn a lot about that and get my butt kicked as a composer in ways that I needed my butt to be kicked. And I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri, but I've lived most of my life in Colorado. And so being able to teach at Western Colorado University, doing percussion and music theory and some composition and some music technology is really, really great. I love it there. And it's so nice to be back in the state.
Awesome, Ben. Thank you for that. So basically, our goal of the podcast today is to get somebody that is an expert in the instruments we have to cover as music teachers and kind of give you a crash course. So the methods courses that we took as undergrads, as I told you in our preliminary talk, our first fall semester of my junior year was when I took percussion methods.
Mhm.
And when I started getting into teaching, it was a real hard realization for me to be like, I don't remember what I'm supposed to teach beginning percussionists because it's been 3 years since I've had that class. How do I make this work? And how do I give my kids a musical experience? So we'll start off with some beginning percussion, work our way through middle school and high school, and then talk about how to prepare kids for college.
Sounds
And
great.
yeah, absolutely. And just on a side note, Ben is an excellent composer, and we got to get him on another episode to talk about composition and how you could hire him to write music for your school, as we just did in Salida, and it's
Oh
an
dear.
awesome piece.
It was a lot
So
of fun. Yeah.
and it was just a great experience for my students to know the composer, meet the composer,
Mhm.
and really great percussion parts for my percussionist too.
Ooh, good. One would hope. One would hope.
So let's get into it. Most schools introduce beginning band somewhere in the 4th, 5th, 6th grade range. I was in 4th grade when I started. We start in Salida in 5th grade. I know some other schools wait till 6th grade. What is your philosophy of getting percussionists started? What's something you need to do? What's something that maybe you would try and avoid to not develop bad habits? Let's just start off with that.
Yeah, great. That's a really, really good question. And so, with kind of the knowledge that I'm mostly teaching kind of college nowadays, I would say that some of the things that I look for, even with the college percussionists, apply even for the really, really young percussionists. And that's trying to make them really diverse, even if it's just at a small level. And so, in some ways, you want to be like a mile wide, but an inch deep in percussion land. And so, if you've got a student who only ever plays triangle, or a student who only ever plays bass drum, that's a great way to potentially not retain that student. At the same time, you don't want to give them huge challenges, especially as it relates to things like keyboard percussion and pitched percussion. You might have students who are pretty good at reading basic rhythms and playing them on snare drum or bass drum or bongos or triangle or suspended cymbal or whatnot. And then you put them in front of a keyboard instrument and they can crumble a little bit. So trying to start your percussionists off really slow, but in a lot of different areas, and having them rotate around in different pieces can be really, really great, so that during that semester's concert, everybody gets to play a little snare drum, everybody gets to play a little bass drum, everybody gets to play a little bit of triangle. And what we run an honor band, all Colorado honor band at Western. For the incoming high schoolers, I try and move them around as much as I can based on the audition information that I've seen, without making anyone feel just super terrified because, oh my gosh, I've never even seen a xylophone before. What intonation do I do with this thing, or something like that? And so, yeah, rotating in a small level is really, really useful at any grade level. So that can be as early as 5th grade. And when I help assign parts for the university's symphonic band here, I like to try and get people rotated around. It's more fun for them. Also, some instruments like big bass drums and crash cymbals are a little bit more physically challenging to play too. And so especially thinking of like a little middle schooler or even an elementary schooler, just giving their arms a little bit of a break can be helpful sometimes too. And like, okay, why don't you go play triangle for this tune instead of holding these heavy crash cymbals 3 pieces in a row or something like that. Composers are building in a lot of great skills for percussionists into the literature already. And so take a look at the parts and see, okay, this is a pretty challenging snare drum part. Is this going to be a growth opportunity for this student, or is it going to terrify the student? How can you rotate someone who's going to do well onto that part? And then see if there's some easier roles that some other people can play, a bit built into your literature that way. And there's usually a gradient in the part difficulty in most band pieces. You've got your choppy snare drum parts, or your choppy mallet parts, your easier percussion parts, your easier mallet parts, and then some things kind of scattered in between. So there's usually an option to do that. And then don't be afraid to water a part, or don't be afraid to beef up a part. Or let's say that you've got an understimulated percussionist. You can take an oboe part, because there's a pretty good chance you're not going to have oboe in your band, and maybe that goes on bells or something like that. So yeah, thinking about part rotation, thinking about the gradient that tends to be built into beginning band literature can be a nice way to rotate people safely and push them a little bit without having them collapse or freak out too much.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we do in Salida is we have like an instrument testing night. And so how do you know if a student is going to be successful as a percussionist? And obviously we don't have the crystal ball to choose the kids' apathy or work ethic or those sort of things, but what are some things that you look for to get them to be successful percussionists when they're trying out instruments?
That's a really great question. There's kind of 2 things I want to talk about. The first one is how do they handle chaos, I suppose? Like, because sometimes, yeah, especially if you are, say, a rural band director and you are a little shorthanded on your percussionist, they might be scurrying around covering a lot of different things, which is really fun for people who like it, but also can be really, really stressful for people who dislike it. So you can kind of say, you can set up a few different instruments, maybe a snare drum and a bass drum and some cymbals, and just assess how willing or how excited or how unwilling or unexcited are they to just try different things, and say, hey, go over to those crash cymbals, pick them up kind of like this and play crash, 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 crash. And if they crumple, then maybe that's not going to be the best choice for them. If they pick them up and start smashing them together, hopefully with some semblance of good time or tempo, hey, that's a good sign. Or can you have them even sit behind a drum set and just can they hit the different instruments, not even playing a pattern yet, but can you activate that bass drum pedal down there? Can you find where your snare drum is? If I show you where it is at first, and then will you remember where it is later? And so how do they deal with kind of some of that really exciting chaos of being a percussionist that is necessary sometimes? And bands of all kinds of different sizes is a great kind of litmus test for thinking, okay, are they going to flourish in this environment, or is it going to be a pain in the butt? What I would avoid is, okay, you got a student who's super comfortable on mallets or who's super comfortable on snare drum, but then they're not really comfortable in anything else. And they become kind of a one-trick pony of sorts in the section. And that was kind of what I was like as a percussionist, as a high schooler, because I was just terrified of mallets and instruments where the notes went up and down and had clefs. The snare drum was like was where my happy place was, but it was causing me to not actually grow as a percussionist as much as I could have. And I guess chaos and kind of assessing their adaptability to some levels of chaos is part one. I guess part two would be their sense of time. So going to a practice pad. Some students also, how loud the instruments are can kind of freak them out a little bit, and they can get used to that. So kind of consider that in your chaos assessment. But maybe if you've got a practice pad set up, or even like a stand with a towel on it, and you blend them some sticks, you can put on like some Michael Jackson or some Billie Eilish or some kind of song that maybe is kind of familiar to them, and just see if they can keep a steady beat along with it. If you put on a metronome, metronomes are fine. They're really necessary tools, but they're not very exciting. And they will get more tempo information if they listen to a pop tune that you play, say through a speaker, or even just through your phone or something like that. Louder would be better. And just see if they can keep a steady pulse. And then just see, okay, can you play rhythm like da 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 da, and you got Michael Jackson's "Beat It" is on, or something like that, and see if they're able to link into that time well. And yeah, okay, you're singing good, 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 good. And if they're drifting a lot in the time, that's going to be a bit of a battle for them as a percussionist, because time is just so important. Because whether you love us or hate us, oftentimes we are the tempo authority, other than the conductor, of course. Percussion ends up being the tempo authority, especially when you get in the marching band and a kind of up-tempo concert band stuff. And so that's a way, in sort of a fun way, that also can disarm them and make them a little less nervous. Play some pop tune and see if they can keep time in some way along with it.
I feel like you should do that for every instrument on an instrument testing night. That's a really, really awesome idea, and I'm going to start using that at the beginning of this year.
Sure, yeah, especially if you can find like some Michael Jackson or like some really kind of fun tune, like some Stevie Wonder in like B flat or something like that. Like, hey, do you know some notes in the B flat major scale? Can you kind of improvise it in time along with this? Yeah, it could be fun. Could be fun.
I like that. Okay, so staying with beginning percussion, being a percussionist, unlike any other instrument that we have in beginning band, where you get to be this Swiss Army knife of having access to all these different things. For me, as a saxophone player, when I'm sitting in band, it's very much, this is my space, this is what I do. And for percussionists, it's very much, this is our space, and we need to make sure that we keep it in order and organized, and we're able to move from point A to point B without interrupting anybody. For somebody that's like a vocal major or a choir director, what advice would you give them for setting up the beginning percussion section to start off the year? Because a lot of these things, the bad habits develop in the first week, and you get in survival mode and you just have the kids do what they, as long as they're not bothering you, that's kind of the goal. At least it was when I started teaching. And
Sure.
so what would be a nice layout for beginning band?
So just to make sure I understand your question, you're thinking about how it's laid out for performing, not how do you organize your space in between rehearsals, correct? It's the former.
Yeah, you're starting off the rehearsal and you say, hey, we need the bass drum in the center, we need
Great.
mallet to the right, that sort of thing, and where you can
Okay.
store stuff, percussion cabinet, those type of things.
Sure, yeah. And every percussion instructor or quote unquote expert you ask might have a slightly different answer to this question. So this is just one that happens to work for me more at the university level, and it's a great starting place to work with. And so I'm going to describe all this from the perspective of the conductor. And yeah, having bass drum as close to center as possible is great. I like to park cymbals right next to bass drum, actually in between snare drum and bass drum, just because traditionally bass drum and crash cymbals are actually played simultaneously by one performer. You would actually find a way to stick the cymbal on top of the drum, and they're usually playing the beats or the unison rhythm simultaneously too. So I like to have those two instruments next to each other. And then looking more to the kind of conductor's right, I like to put timpani over there. And you can also squeeze in some other instruments that you might need, like drum set or some other larger percussion in between the bass drum and the timpani. And so you've kind of got your battery percussion in the center, then to the director's right, you've got timpani, and then moving to the director's left, you're squeezing in other things like tambourines and triangles and items like that. And then ending with mallets. I like to put the mallets that project the most closest to the center, and then arc closer and closer to the audience with the mallets that don't quite project as well. And so one thing that you just kind of can't hide, because it's a bit like piccolo, is like bells. Remember, those bells, they transpose 2 octaves, not one, 2 octaves higher than written. And so that is in a really high frequency. It's probably your highest pitched instrument in the band, other than if you've got like a really great piccolo player or something like
Right,
that. So
right.
I put them fairly close to the center, and then I build my arc outward. Xylophone is also a transposing instrument. We play with hard mallets. It's pretty piercing. I would put that next. And then if you happen to have a young program that has vibraphones and marimbas, I would put those in there next, with marimba as probably our softest mallet instrument, actually closest to the audience in the arc in the back. And then you need to season the taste. If say you've got a really wicked move where somebody needs to go from timpani to bells, well, maybe you can stall during the concert or as you shift between pieces and assign, okay, Gertrude and Bubba, you two are going to move the bells so that Cynthia can play them nearer to the timpani. Meanwhile, I know I need to rehearse this moment with the winds up here, so you buy them a little bit of time so that they're not just running around and tripping or dropping their music, or they forgot their mallets, or they knock something over, or they bump into a friend or something like that. So if you can buy them a little time on those really, really difficult moves to get your instruments closer together, that's always nice. To some degree, percussionists do need to be able to hustle and
Yeah.
embrace kind of some of the chaos of transitioning from instrument to instrument. So it's kind of up to the director to assess, is this a reasonable transition? Do they really have enough time to get over there or not? And if they do have enough time, then if you can make a photocopy of their music and stick them out they need at their next station, then they just go from place to place. They're not carrying anything and they're ready to go when they get there. But yeah, that definitely certainly does take a little bit of planning.
Nice. Thank you. Good.
Sure.
So I'm thinking about uh, not so much beginning. Well, this kind of is going throughout. Um, I had this question worded in my head, and now it's not making sense as I say it. So let me take a step back. When you have students that are playing, we have this wide variety, and you just described three different types of bell percussion. You mentioned tambourine, some auxiliary percussion, timpani. Those aren't instruments that students have access at home. So when we are expecting students to practice, and some of us assign practice logs, I've definitely been in a position where a student's like, yeah, like, what do you want me to do? I don't have a timpani at home. How do I practice my part? And then I say something
Mhm.
stupid like, well, you have other music you don't play timpani on. And they're like, well, yeah, I'm playing triangle. And that, so not, I want to be able to answer the student's question, not tell them to do something different.
Sure. Yeah, this is one of the biggest challenges, and especially for you percussionists who really want to do well at all levels. It's one of
Mm-hmm.
the most frustrating things because you can't own a full set of timpani and a marimba and a vibraphone and triangles and snare drums and just have all those things sitting at home. So a few things that I recommend to educators, and sometimes these are workable solutions, sometimes they just realistically are not, is to try and establish, and this could be via like a para or maybe during an office hour, some open times where percussionists can come in and practice. And high schoolers will sometimes have like an off hour or a study period where that could work for them. At the younger grade levels, it's usually not something that exists for them. So is like an after school block a time that's possible. And maybe if you talk to your admin, you could get your schedule adjusted accordingly, such that you have like some of your work time or your planning period actually happens a little bit after school or before school, so that you're around and can get those percussionists access to those spaces. You definitely don't want to be so giving of your time that you're just like exhausted and you feel like you're
Yeah.
always having to bend over backwards for your percussionist, but there might be a way to work it so that it's a good deal for you and a good deal for the percussionist to get them time on the instruments. For some of the smaller ones like snare drum, it's possible for schools to collect them or even buy them used or get them donated, or just purchase really inexpensive ones or practice pads that students can work out their rhythms, particularly for snare drum, but that'll also apply to their rhythms on mallets or on timpani. It gets really tricky when you go to your timpani and your keyboard percussion instruments. And so some schools are really, really lucky and they might even have a loaner instrument for the summer or something where a student can take it home. Most programs are going to have one set of bells. It might be great, they might be awful, and there's really not room to loan those out in a way that's really responsible and where you're taking
Mm-hmm.
good care of the gear that's in there. And that's where trying to develop either like some kind of after school or during the day option for students to come in and work on their notes. And sometimes it can even turn into like a social occasion where students get together. Oh, hey, I'm going to work on my bell part. You're going to work on timpani. Great. I'll go in this corner of the room. You go in that corner. And we'll see how each other is doing and help each other out a little bit. That's possible. But it's a matter of who's going to supervise and open up the space. And so maybe that's a situation where like a parent can help, or maybe like another staff member can help, or maybe there's a way to negotiate your schedule so that you can do some other work or teach other lessons, and hopefully get paid to be teaching those lessons while you have your percussionists also working and getting on the instruments that they actually need to use. But this is a tricky solution. In college, the solution was, okay, don't go home during the break, just stay here and practice, which was kind of the narrative. But of course, it's not an option. That is absolutely not really an option for the younger kids. And so during the break times, if there are maybe some days that they could come in, but you don't necessarily want to be coming in and working on those days if you're also on break. And so trying to think creatively about solutions where you're not going to get burned out, you don't feel taken advantage of, but you can open up those spaces is really the way to go, in my opinion. And I don't have a great concrete answer because everyone's administrative and scheduling situation is going to be different, right?
When I started teaching in Salida, the band room was outside the cafeteria. And so during the lunch period, when the room wasn't being used, that's when I would have my students do their formative assessments for all the instruments, but also that's when percussion was able to come in. And since I tied it to the formative assessment curriculum, my admin supported the lunch duty teacher to poke their head in the band room too. And that was a nice solution that didn't burn me out and allowed me to get off campus and go have lunch with my wife when, we needed to make that time for each other.
Of course, yeah, I think that's a brilliant solution, and yeah, it's really smart.
So we're going to exit out a beginning band. What does a percussion need to do to know going into their second year to keep them on track to get to you when they get to college?
Great. Oh, wow. So kind of going all the way between beginning band up to the college level. Oh, good heavens. Okay, I'll try and not be too verbose. Continuing to encourage versatility in their skills is really, really good. So they're not just a snare drummer or not just a xylophone player. And so that's really, really important to think about how you can use, again, the gradient that is built into a lot of band music, even up until the college level. I see this gradient happening all the times where some parts are easier than other parts. Unfortunately, those easy parts tend to be stuck on bass drum or triangle or cymbals and things like that. So when there is an opportunity, when there is an easier snare drum part, when there is an easier keyboard part, try and judge your students' abilities and their comfort level and assign those so that they are spreading their wings a little bit and trying some new things when the literature provides for it there. In addition to that, there's a saying that I think is kind of true, that especially in large ensembles, percussionists spend 90% of their time bored and 10% of their time scared. It's like, okay, I'm not playing a lot of the time, or when I am playing, it's a little bit boring. And then sometimes I get parts where, oh man, I don't play a whole lot of these parts are really scary and really important there. So this is where percussion ensemble as a different and separate group is great, because it's chamber music where they just have to inhale a lot of notes, and versatility is absolutely a must. So if there is any room to start a percussion ensemble, or if there's a staff member you can maybe hire to run it, that can be super, super useful for them, especially if you have enough percussionists to have it running regularly. And I think you really only need to have 4 to be able to regularly run a percussion ensemble. And those 4 are going to play lots of quartets or maybe even some trio things. And maybe you can convince a 5th or 6th person to jump in and do some larger things. In that case, I would just go to Tap Space Percussion. They're an awesome publisher. It's really easy to sort their literature by what instruments and what equipment you do and don't have in your program. How many players, the difficulty level. Do I need someone who can play 4-mallet marimba? Get real, that's not happening. So you can filter out all those pieces or include them if you got a smoking marimbist. Like if you've only got 3 timpani, well, then you can sort by like how many timpani you've got there. So that's a really great resource for just finding literature relatively easily. And their music tends to be very, very high quality as well. Nice. On Tap Space. So that's a way to do it. And that is a great way to just develop their hands in a much more accelerated way than what they're going to be getting. Even if you're the best band director on the planet and you're picking great rep, you just can't get their hands moving and their musical minds quite as engaged as you often can in percussion ensemble when you're doing chamber music. with the
Yeah.
percussionist, and it's really, really fun. It's super fun. And they can open for your band. This is something I was actually started to do at Western. Like the percussion ensemble plays 2, 3, sometimes 4 pieces, and then the band concert happens after that. So it's like a really great appetizer for the band
Yeah.
concert. And the students like doing it too, and it involves similar personnel, similar equipment. Logistically, it's an easy thing to do. There's a short intermission in between, and you're off to the races there. But yeah, basically, back to your original question, going from beginning band to college, encouraging that kind of versatility so that they can play a variety of different things is really, really important. And it's one of the biggest things that I look for my incoming percussionists is that can they only do snare drum? Can they only do drum set? Can they only do keyboard? And that is going to limit them in terms of the ensembles they can serve in, frankly. And then just continuing to push them. If you can get them into private lessons, especially in high school, that is huge. That is a great thing. It's tricky to do in rural areas. It's really, really tricky to do. But hey, even like online lessons would probably be better. Even asynchronous online lessons where they make a recording, send it to a percussion teacher would be great because they can provide them some direction or, oh, you really shouldn't be using those mallets, or hey, consider this sticking pattern in this excerpt, or great job with the dynamic contrast here, consider XYZ is a nice way to go. If you just don't have access to teachers in your area, which may very well be the case if you're listening to this podcast.
Right. Well, you brought up a great point about sticking patterns and mallet choices. Can we explore a little bit uh, how you would define what a sticking pattern is versus a rudiment, and talk about how you could communicate that to students too? And then we could talk about percussion mallets.
Great. Yeah. Oh my gosh, sticking. Rudiments have certain stickings kind of baked into the rudiments themselves, but of course, not all rhythms that we play are one of the Percussive Arts Society
Mm-hmm.
40 rudiments. So with stickings, I coach stickings a lot, and it's actually most important with keyboards and timpani, as opposed to say snare drum, because you're not just going up and down, you're going up and down, but now you're going side to side as
Yeah.
well. And so trying to think of patterns that flow nicely up the drums or down the drums or timpani, or up the keyboard or down the keyboard on mallets is really, really essential, so that they're not just tripping over their hands. Like if you're playing like a roll, like just like a single stroke roll on mallets, to try and get that sense of sustain, either because you've asked them to or it's in a piece. Make sure they're leading with the right hand when they go up and the left hand when they go down as a basic way to do that. And sometimes you'll find players, and not just right-handed people, even left-handed people will often start everything with the right hand, which is really, really funny. It's like,
Mm.
hello, you have this other hand. Just reach out in the direction you need to go with the hand that's on that side of your body, and you will have a much more happy time playing this tricky xylophone excerpt or whatever it happens to be. And on instruments like snare drum, it's thinking of things that are going to be easy to duplicate in the hands. And so at moderate tempi, playing all of their eighth notes and quarter notes with the right hand for ultimate consistency, and filling in 16 notes with the left hand until the tempo gets too fast. So
Right.
there's always an exception to the rule with stickings, right? So I have, and maybe can I plug my YouTube thing right
Oh,
now, Mr. Wilkins? Okay, great.
let's
So
talk about it.
yeah, so I have a whole video about sticking. I started this YouTube channel, and the YouTube channel is just called Percussion Methods, like maybe the course title that you took during your education degree or something like that. And so it's free, it's open, please use it. And I've got things about snare drum and buzz rolls and timpani. And in a lot of these videos, we talk about stickings as well, especially in keyboards and timpani. But I have a video just about snare drum stickings and how to concoct smart snare drum stickings so that they are expressive, you get good consistency, and are basically kind of user friendly and musical friendly as well. So go check it out. YouTube, Percussion Methods, Snare Drum Stickings, I think is what the video is called on there. But rudiments, good to learn. And they're often used in pieces simply because these are building blocks of well rudimental drumming, especially march and percussion as well. These are things that feel good in the hands or sometimes challenging for the hands, but these are kind of like the snare drummer's scales. And so much of rudimental drumming, and it shows up in concert music and shows up in march and band music a lot, is built out of these rudimental building blocks. And they're sort of great for your dexterity, your coordination. I use them in timpani sometimes and drum sets. Sometimes they get deployed in all kinds of ways that will kind of surprise me. I have ones that I like to have all my students learn that I think show up more often than others. I don't usually have students go through all 40 of them. That's quite a few, but someone told me that all music is just variations on scales.
Mm-hmm.
all tonal music is just variations on scales. So if you know your scales, it makes all tonal music easier, and even probably some atonal music. Basically,
Yeah.
if it's in like the Western 12 chromatic pitches system, and it doesn't have some kind of really interesting but kind of niche tuning system, then yes, scales will make you better at
Yeah.
playing music, and rudiments are the same way for drummers.
And I didn't quite realize that when I started teaching. Like, I had the students that played all the scales with just the right hand, or they just played all the snare drum. Like in the beginning method books, it's a lot of quarter, eighth, eighth, quarter, which you could do with one hand, and then being able to get the both right and left hand being able to be used
Mm-hmm.
equally as proficient.
Yes.
That's what I struggled teaching, and I always did my formal assessments. I had the kids do videos instead of recordings, so I could see what they were doing with their hands, and
Great.
making sure that you can't just
Yeah.
fake it. They're
And the
they're
stickings, yeah, and stickings are funny because sometimes, like with the college students, the people who are getting ready for orchestral auditions or just want to sound really, really amazing, we will put things on the same hand over and over again because, same muscles, same tendons, all the same stuff, same stick, same part of the drum head. You're going to get a more consistent sound. But for younger musicians, I have them do slightly different things because I want them to develop that kind of coordination and dexterity. So the age level you're working with and the skills, like the physical skills you want them to learn, also influences the sticking.
yeah.
It's one of those things like you'll always find an exception. You'll always find an exception.
So let's talk about mallets for a second. Can you just go through when you're looking to assign a specific mallet for a specific mallet instrument, what are some things we need to look for to make the best educational choice, not just for the students, but also for the piece of music you're trying to learn?
Yeah, of course. And these are things that are usually relatively easy to hear. Like often, if you take a xylophone mallet and go strike say vibraphone with it, it sounds just like very kind of thin and glassy and overtony and not super great. So we can kind of approach that question in two ways. Like, what do I wish that percussionists would have in their own personal stick bag of stuff that they've got? Or what should my program really have around to borrow? And I think encouraging both is really, really good. And so
Yeah.
even at Western here at the university, like I have got what I call like a borrow bag for some of our community members, like people who aren't music majors, who I don't really necessarily expect to have a matching set of marimba mallets or a matching set of vibraphone mallets or some really soft timpani mallets. And so I've got more of kind of the niche items and also some just commonly used stuff in what I call the borrow bag. And it's university property and it all needs to go back in there. A lot of these borrow bag items are just like sticks and mallets that people have lost and left around that are good quality that I just chuck in this borrow bag. And there are some things that I also purchase year to year as well. And so generally, I can kind of quickly run through a list of some different stuff, but mallets are good things to have set up in a borrow bag. Drumsticks, I consider much more of a consumable item, especially
Yeah.
if you're using them in marching band or drum set, because you
Yeah.
play a lot of rim shots. You're hitting the metal part of the drum with the shaft of the stick a lot, and it just chews up your sticks. And that's normal. And sticks aren't tremendously expensive, and it is normal that you need to throw out pairs every once in a while. But that's perfectly normal there. Your mallets, if you have a range of medium weight mallets and say a pair for marimba in soft, medium, and hard, great. That's awesome. If you've got students working on four mallets, maybe you get two pairs for all those things. And then for vibraphone, and there's a difference, and you get different tonal characteristics between marimba and vibraphone mallets. I can talk about gear all day, but anyway,
Mhm.
also like some just hard vibraphone mallets. You pretty much just need hard vibe mallets. And then a pair of xylo mallets, a pair of bell mallets, preferably like hard plastic is good. I prefer that to brass, but you could get brass if you wanted to. And then some soft and some hard timpani mallets. And you're going to be pretty well equipped, in addition to like some bass drum mallets and some triangle beaters and some chime hammers and some other kind of more niche things that are in there. So if you're thinking about, okay, covering a few different hardnesses, especially for instruments like marimba, and then, okay, do I have a decent sounding pair for all of my instruments in my borrow bag? And you should be covered. And take a Sharpie and write your school's name on the shaft of the mallets. There's going to be a stamp, like it'll say Vic Firth on it or whatever the brand of the model is. Underneath that with a Sharpie, you can write your school's name and even put like a little bit of clear like Scotch tape over it so it doesn't rub off there. I do that a lot so that students know this isn't yours. Don't steal
Yeah.
these mallets. These belong to the school. These are everybody's.
Yeah.
Everybody's. But does that kind of answer your question about mallets, or were you wanting to get into more like mallet selection?
I think we could get into mallet selection if you want. We're because I don't pay for Zoom, we're going to stop this and restart it. And
Sure.
then that'll give us a good spot to stop. We'll come back and we'll talk about mallet selection. I also think that we should briefly mention some instrument care since a lot of these instruments aren't owned by the students. So there's not
Yep.
as much um, incentive to take care of things.
Yes. Yeah. The communal aspect is great for like building camaraderie. And I think percussion sections tend to be a little bit more tight knit than sometimes other instrumental sections because of that communal aspect of sharing the gear and sharing the different roles to accomplish a common goal is different in percussion. And I think it creates some tight bonds within the section. But it also creates some problems, as you just alluded to. But yeah, I guess can I mention one quick mallet misconception real quick before we need to restart?
Let's do it.
Yeah. A lot of people think a harder mallet is a louder mallet, and that's not necessarily true. It's more articulate, it's brighter. But if you want a louder sound, then the performer ultimately just needs to hit the instrument harder. Now, if you got a really puffy mallet on an instrument like marimba or vibraphone or timpani, then yeah, you won't get that immediate attack, which affects like the perception of loudness there. But if you want more volume, that's not necessarily a mallet thing. Now, if you know you want it more articulate or brighter, that's definitely a mallet thing. So think about mallet choice as more your tone color and articulation more so than purely volume. But a harder mallet does tend to give the perception of being a little bit louder, but mostly where that volume is coming from is just asking the performer to just hit that instrument harder.
Perfect. All right.
It,
Talk to you in a few minutes.
sounds good. See ya.
All right. We're back. Hey, since we were just talking about gear, let's jump into that. You're a percussionist and you're. Ooh. We're gonna save this quick. Okay. Come on. That's not where I want to be. Sorry. Okay, now we're back. Okay, so we're a percussionist. We're in public school. We're past beginning band. We're moving into high school. What's something that the student should own? And what types of things should they own or at least be provided? Stick, mallet.
Sure. Yeah. So sticks and mallets is a great collection to build over time. Some of them are just going to wear out. Like eventually, all sticks and mallets will wear out. Sticks, especially like I mentioned before, used for marching band or drum set, tend to wear out faster because you just crack them and hack them up quite a bit more. And the tips chip off, and then they feel funny. You got soft spots and hard spots on there. Yeah, not good. Um, some things to own, like you mentioned, going into high school. Great.
Sure, let's go there.
Yeah, for high school, it would be great if they had um, a pair of drum set sticks, like some kind of lighter weight drum set sticks that they can just kind of hack up, no problem. And then some heavier concert snare drumming sticks would be nice to have and not tremendously expensive either. And those will last basically indefinitely because you're not going to be playing things like rim shots or really loud techniques where you're smashing the metal part of the rim on concert snare very often. If you do have a concert snare part that calls for that, that's when you grab your drum set sticks. So the drum set sticks are kind of the ones that you triage and you hack through pairs quite a bit. I really like Vic Firth 5As or Vic Firth 5Bs for the drum set sticks. Those are good. They're hit free. They last a fairly long time for drum set sticks. For some concert sticks, if you want something inexpensive, you can go with the Vic Firth 2B. It's actually a really big drum set stick that also, for younger hands, feels great as a concert snare stick. It's got a really nice feel when you play buzz rolls, and it's just going to give you a bolder sound on those slightly larger concert drums that you want in concert band. Um, some vibraphone mallets would be nice too. I like vibraphone mallets because they tend to be hard, and you can also use them on marimba. Marimba mallets don't work quite as well on vibraphone as vibraphone mallets work on marimba. So that's nice. You can also use them if you need like soft xylophone playing. A pair of mallets that works for bells and xylophone is nice. Like some hard xylophone mallets will also work on bells, okay. And then maybe some hard timpani mallets would be nice too. But there are students for which, you know what, no problem. They can get all those sticks and mallets, and that's not a financial burden at all. There are going to be students in your program that even getting a pair of like drum set sticks is not going to be a high priority for some students and their families as well. So that's where having a borrow bag that has a lot of those bases covered, like I was talking about earlier, great. If they've got their own stuff, they should use their own stuff. If they don't, they can go to the borrow bag. If they can only have one thing, like some drum set sticks and maybe some xylophone mounts would be really, really great. So they can cover bells and xylophone, and they can use those sticks on concert center, and they can use that on drum set as well. After that, maybe a pair of timpani mounts would be good. Some manufacturers, like I think Big First does this, they have like the beginning band pro pack, and it's a little stick bag, and you've got like some yarn mallets and some drum set sticks and some timpani mallets in it as at a discounted price. That's a nice way to go. I think Denver Percussion, which is an awesome, I'm just going to plug them real quick. They're an awesome equipment supplier based in Denver. So for us in Colorado, they're relatively local. I think they might be doing some like educator packs as well, or it might also come with a method book or something like that too. And so there's some really nice options. Sometimes they come with practice pads as well. So you can kind of shop around a little bit and see and maybe have a few different price points for what your students might be able to afford. Or you call up your local, your friendly neighborhood percussion professor, moi, and hey, get these things. Because I've got a list that I give to my college students that's already prioritized. And so they can just go down the list, whatever they can afford in order, and they're good to go. And it's usually high quality gear that's relatively inexpensive. You can spend $50 on a pair of mounts. You can spend $30 on a pair of mounts. You can spend $80 on a pair of mounts. And so you also want this stuff to be durable, because if it wears out, they're just going to be shelling out more money because their mallets are falling apart or something like that.
That would be, I would like that list. That would
I will send it to you. Yes,
yeah.
I'll send it to you shortly.
Let's put the link to your YouTube channel and that list in our comments for the podcast, so everyone has access to that. That would be
Sure.
fabulous.
Spreading knowledge thither and yon. I love this. This is great. This is a good thing.
Absolutely. Ben, this has been a really positive experience, and what I really enjoy about doing these episodes is I'm still learning, even though I feel like I'm the old man in the world now with the band directing, but it was nice to have some really good takeaways. As we close out the episode, what are some things that, if I was the band director and you called me and said, what can this student do? What would be a good response for me to be, sending you somebody that's of quality?
Like into a collegiate program, you
Yeah.
mean?
And they don't necessarily
Awesome.
have to
Yeah.
be music majors. I know Western did.
Mhm.
Full disclosure, I went to Western, and I
Yes, a
did not.
proud alumni. Yeah.
Yeah, Harvard of the
Yeah.
West. Um,
Fear the ears.
yeah, but I didn't start off as a music major, but I still got
Mhm.
scholarships to participate in ensembles.
Mhm.
And a lot of my students, when they graduate high school, they don't want to stop playing, but they don't necessarily want to be music teachers or professional
Yeah.
musicians. So, as a percussion teacher at Western, if a kid wants to come and play in concert band or have some kit chops to play in the jazz band or the
Mhm.
athletic bands, uh, what would be a good response from their teacher to say they could do this?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you kind of answered the question in some ways in the question itself, because you mentioned, well, can they do some marching percussion? Can they want to play in the symphonic band? Do they have drum set shops? And this kind of goes back to this word of like skill versatility with percussionists. And
Mm-hmm.
boy, when I have a high school educator say, hey, I've got the student who's coming to school and they want to be a music major or an engineering major, or they want to do nursing or whatever it might be, one of the first things that I assess when I'm thinking about, okay, is this a student that we can support with a scholarship, and can we get them into certain ensembles? Is there skill diversity? So if they're only a drum set person, then they might be a great fit for jazz band, but I know that it might not be a great fit for our drum line, or they might not be a good fit for our concert band, depending on their music reading ability and what their background really is looking like, big picture. So that kind of versatility is really great. I mean, I definitely ask for fundamentals, like, can you play a paradiddle? Can you play a B flat major scale? Can you play a B major scale? Ooh, ooh. Can you do some of these things? Yeah. Do you have some reading ability? And then from there, especially if there are some gaps in their knowledge, then maybe they're a great candidate to take like a GE Music Fundamentals course, which will help keep them on track for any major. But then it helps boost their music reading ability. And so just because they have some gaps in their knowledge, like even at Western, which is a relatively smaller boutique sized program, you might say,
Mm-hmm.
we have some courses built in to kind of help shore some of those things up if they're really gung ho about music, but might just need help in a few different areas. So versatility and some good fundamentals are what I look like, and then their attitude as well. Like, are they a good communicator? Do I think they're going to show up to all the rehearsals? basically. So much of the issues that we have, not often, but sometimes have, are like, wow, this person seems like a dynamite percussionist, but boy, they didn't show up for the first rehearsal. What the heck is going on? There's usually a good reason for that. But are they going to be a good communicator? Are they just a good young professional who we're going to really, really enjoy working with as well?
Oh, that's great information, Ben. Last question before we get into some more fun questions. You brought up rudiments several times, and I brought up rudiments. And just to take a step back, you mentioned there was the 40 rudiments of the percussion artist. I forget the exact verbiage you used.
Yeah.
I know as a sax player in a high school concert band, knowing all 12 major scales in the relative minor is a great thing, but you don't necessarily need all that at your disposal to play some of the literature. Do you have a list of rudiments that you're saying these are essential to be the concert band percussionist, or is there any sort of ranking like you have with equipment?
There is, yeah. And these are ones where I do like print out the Percussive Arts Society, like 40 rudiments, and because I want my students to see them and be exposed to what the heck a triple ratamacue is or what a patafla is. And these are some of the more niche rudiments that I like to teach situationally. So if we're looking in lessons at some rudimental drumming or some drum set playing where, wow, actually this particular rudiment, which I wouldn't normally have you focus on, is actually useful in this situation. I kind of teach them situationally. But then there are ones where I test students on them and they have to do it to like get through their lessons through the semester there. So I do have a list. It includes things like some roll rudiments, flam rudiments, drag rudiments, and also some diddle rudiments, paradiddles, things like that. So out of 40, there's probably less than 20 that actually formally test them on as part of their first year here at Western. And then we'll touch on the other ones kind of situationally there. So yes, I do have a list of that. I can also send that your way too.
I would love that.
Sure.
Well, let's get to some fun questions. I always ask these two questions at the end for our guests. First is, what was your favorite musical moment as a student, and what's your favorite musical moment as a teacher?
Ooh, boy. Superlatives are kind of tricky, like favorite or best or something like that. So I'll try and think of some moments I really liked. Yes, okay. I was probably like a sophomore, like a freshman or a sophomore in high school. In the high school I went to, had a pep band, but didn't have a marching band. But I was really interested in marching arts and wound up like doing some indoor drum line stuff like that. And I thought, wow, look at these incredible drum lines playing gazillions of notes and how technically well they play together as a drum line was really, really fascinating to me. And so I went to this band camp and it was hosted at UNC Greeley. It's the Colorado Masonic Band Camp. I'm pretty sure it's still in operation. And that's a really wonderful, yeah, and it's free for students, or at least it was back when I was going. So that really helped my ability to go too, is that it wasn't going to cost like an arm and a leg to go to like a week-long camp with some really good instructors there. And so I was able to, because it's mostly kind of marching band focus. You march in a parade, and you play marching band stuff, but indoors in a concert as well. It's a really, really interesting model, and it just scratched that itch. And I remember it was dark out, and I was with the drumline. We were rehearsing late in the evening, playing my first like drumline cadence, like my first groovy thing, playing snare drum with them, and it was just an incredible experience. I was like, oh wow, this is something I really love doing. This is scratching a musical itch that I didn't really know I had, but it's really, really fun and exciting for me. And I kind of got really into marching arts a little bit. Certainly in college, I did a fair amount of that too, at Colorado State. As a teacher, oh boy, just about any time a student like performs well by their own standard, is a moment that makes me feel really good. And is one of those things that gets me out of bed in the morning because I don't know if that day is going to hold one of those moments or not. And so that's one of the things that, as I've been in the position here at Western, doing percussion directing and teaching private lessons, learning more and exploring new literature and new techniques and new ways of teaching to try and develop more of those moments where a student does really well by their standards, be that in a recital or in a concert or in the classroom as well. And so there's been more and more of those moments happening, which is great. It feels really, really good. And the students here work super, super hard at Western, so it's really a delight.
Oh, that's awesome, Ben. Well, thanks again for joining us. We'll post some of those resources in the comments. Please subscribe and follow